Yes, and I guess now we are finally live. I want to welcome to our conversation Ivan. He is talking to us from St. Petersburg, and we are going to talk about ecological problems and ecological education and ecological control in Russia and in Finland. To us from St. Petersburg, and we are going. So, Ivan, why don't we start with you just telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what kind of ecological profession, ecological sphere do you work in?
Yes, hi everyone. My pleasure to be here. So I've been studying in Finland for 4 years in Tampere University of Applied Sciences for environmental engineering. Then I moved back to Russia, and now I work in a little ecological company as a project environmental engineer. So basically what we do is that certain industrial sites require themselves to have certain environmental projects that denote which certain compounds or chemicals are required to have sort of threshold limit values to them. And
so you do some sort of analysis of those factors?
Not exactly. We basically calculate them with the data that we receive from the industrial site. Mm-hmm. We calculate it precisely according to the meteorological factors and basically all the factors available to us to calculate and input. And then we basically calculate if the industrial site exceeds this threshold limit value in their releases and fumes, or they do not. And then we act accordingly. When we can suggest them to limit them by using some filters or certain regimes of work, or we might basically oblige them to pay certain fines and taxes to the government, basically.
Mm-hmm. So what happens when you find that some site does not meet the necessary requirements?
Do you want the honest answer or the clear and cut answer? Because there are two answers to this question.
Okay, well, I guess, why don't you start with telling us how it should be, like, in the perfect way?
If the threshold limit values of compounds are exceeded, then it actually depends on which project are we working on. We either calculate how much they exceed. So is it like 1.1? Is it like 2 times, 3 times, and so on? And according to that, we calculate how much they have to pay in taxes to the government. Or we might suggest them an alternative. For example, you might use such and such regimes, or you might install such and such filters. And if we're working on different types of project, which is sanitary protection zones, we might basically develop such kind of zones for them. Those zones are basically kind of like an alienation zones in which no houses can be built, no playgrounds, no medical houses, stuff like that. So that's how it should work. So we develop these projects, suggest them to the contractee, I believe that's the right word. And they accept it, sign it, and then they move on according to our suggestions. But we live in the world of capitalism. So instead, what happens is we try to mitigate what's written on the paper as much as possible. So we try to rig the calculations, or we
purposefully.
Yes, we know when it exceeds certain amounts, we can calculate them because there are certain programs. We do not calculate it by hand in spreadsheets. There are certain programs that are developed to calculate those threshold limit values. And basically those values, they are not only applied to the chemicals, but also to acoustics, to the noise, to the electronic emissions and vibration, infrasound, ultrasound, all that sort of thing, biological compounds even. So basically we try to make our customers happy as possible, you might say, but while doing that, we obviously damage the environment and the nature. But I guess that's what our government wants, because it doesn't really pay enough attention to this, I might say.
But are there organizations that in the said cases, for instance, would say, no, okay, you found something in our soil or in our site that doesn't meet expectations and we want to correct it and we will do it? Like, how often do you come across such cases?
I would say it's around 10%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So basically, all the other 90% of organizations and companies, they either want us to actually make the maximum sanitary protection zones like possible according to the legislation, so that they kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like land appropriation sort of thing, or at least they think that it's kind of land appropriation, but it's not how it works. But they do not want to listen to us because they're like multi-billion-dollar companies. So we do how they say, or they just want us to basically nullify their impact according to our project, at least. And they want basically to show to different governmental agencies that, hey, we are absolutely ecologically friendly and we are fine. You don't need to look at us. You don't need to text us. Please leave us alone.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what happens.
So in that case, why would you say does your company exist?
That is a very good question. And it's a question with which I struggle for the whole time I work in there. And I do not really have a clear answer to this in terms of justice. But in terms of like Russian realities and living in Russia, it's basically so that companies can, I wouldn't say it's money laundering per se, but they're kind of saving themselves some money by putting like 10% of money which they can lose into us, so that we develop these projects that directly contradict the laws, but we basically manipulate and bob and weave in this legislation, which is like made like a fine Swiss cheese. I'm going back to this. That's a whole topic in of itself. And basically try to make it so that it seems that everything is completely fine, because otherwise they'd be fined and taxed really heavily, and there might be some potential jail time even. So because environment and ecology and nature as a whole is such a concept that you cannot really, or at least in Russian realities, you cannot really invest into nature. I guess in more developed countries, you can actually invest in some ecological projects and some environmental related issues so that they will actually give you back money. But in Russia, there are no such initiatives, neither from the government nor from the big industrial companies. So nobody wants to waste basically their money on being environmentally friendly here, because it's a waste of money here.
Yes, we talked quite a lot today also about garbage segregation and about garbage polygons and how they are, well, practically illegally created and how they feast
all the time, yeah.
Humans. Yes, like we covered that topic quite a lot today. But I want to ask you is, you have the experience of studying ecology in Finland, yet you work and implement your knowledge in Russia. How different are were your expectations when you were studying ecology with your reality right now? Did the reality meet your expectations?
Oh, it's been a harsh wake up. That's for certain, because I've been basically daydreaming that I would be such a cool ecologist when I come back in here with a lot of potential and passion and experience, and then I come back here and it was really a harsh wake up when I started working, because throughout several months I realized that I did understand the exterior of the problem, because I understood that everything is definitely bad and there are a lot of things that need to be changed. But I thought that, hey, maybe I can make a difference. Maybe there is something to be, and I still believe I do. And I believe that individuals can make a difference in ecology and environment in Russia, because it's such a multifaceted issue that it can only not be solved from the top to bottom, so from the government, but also from the society, because that's just the way it works. But it was a harsh wake up, because the legislation here is it's just different. It's just night and day between Finland and Russia. Also, the attitude of people towards ecology is basically not developed in any way, shape, or form. Also, companies are just, I believe they do know how much of an impact they cause on the nature and the society and the people that live around them, but they just don't really care, to be honest. At least that's what I've learned throughout working here, because I've worked on certain projects when the threshold limit value like exceeds like 40 times the amount it needs to be. And those compounds are actually, they are pretty harsh to the human health. And those companies know that, the managers of these sites, they know it, but they just don't really want to manage it, because to lower this values is to invest a lot of money into them, which is definitely not want to.
What kind of companies are your clients usually?
All sorts of companies. Do you help? All sorts of companies. Mainly, these are like those titans of Russian economy: Lukoil, Gazprom, Rosneft, basically anything oil and or gas related. That's because that's the way it goes in Russia. But sometimes these are also like small electrical companies that work in certain regions. Sometimes we develop those projects for like little shopping malls or stuff like it. It really does depend on when they come, but like 85% are those real like titans. And well, basically because they want to cover their butts and they want to evade taxes. And usually the companies that want to be actually honest, and the companies that want to show that they're actually environmentally friendly, are those small companies. That's the way it tends to be. There was only one exception. Like there is a company called Bashneft. It's like a medium-sized oil rigging company. And they actually wanted their projects to be in accordance to the law. But that is actually really, really rare.
It is so surprising, isn't it, that something that's supposed to be the absolute norm is something that you call as very rare?
It's not really as surprising, I think, because once again, it's such a multifaceted issue. You cannot really call those companies guilty alone by themselves, because yet again, legislation is really made like a fine Swiss cheese. It's so absurd and insane. There are so many gray areas, basically, which you can interpret in this way or another. Basically, the way we work is that we contact with different governmental agencies related to sanitation in many different regions, because there are regional agencies and regional departments of Rospotrebnadzor. I do not really know how to translate it properly, but basically it's a department that relates to everything customer and client related, so to speak. But they've also handled COVID in Russia, for example. So they also do everything related to hygiene and sanitation. And they have their regional departments. And we usually work with them to have an approval of those projects, because they have to approve and then basically put their stamp on them. But the way it works is that each and every single regional agency interprets legislation differently. And there are no exceptions to this. Every single one of them has some sort of requirement that is different from another one. And it's actually baffling how they can come up with so many different requirements within the same legislation. It is actually quite insane. And that's what I think is like one of the major problems with legislation in Russia, is that there are so many gray areas and it's written so vaguely that you can basically interpret the same things however you want. There is actually a saying in in many professions, actually. So what's 2 + 2? Well, how much do you want it to be? And that's the way it works, basically, in Russia. And that's one of the things that I think should be fixed first. Definitely.
I see. Well, the question that I wanted to ask you is, why did you choose to get your ecological education in Finland? Why not in Russia?
I'm going to be honest with you. At the age of 17, you don't really know what you want from life. So it wasn't really like a conscientious choice. It was more of like, okay, I'm kind of good at these things. Okay, let's see what I can do with these things.
Yes, but why did your choice fall on Finland and not on something in Russia?
Oh, I already knew in this age that environmental education in Russia is terrible.
Define terrible.
Well, for example, I know so many people in Russia who are actually quite knowledgeable, and they would have been really proficient experts in ecology and environment, but their projects and their worldviews do not correlate with what our government wants. So that basically they are just thrown aside and they have to find something else to do with their ideas and how to implement them. And usually they do not find the resources here because once again, other than the government that also just throws nothing but pennies, there are not a lot of like well-funded initiatives in Russia in terms of environment. There are some, but not a lot, and most of them are usually foreign. So I knew already before going into Russian environmental education that it has to be either something really, really niche, or it needs to be something that aligns with our government's worldview that I already knew at the age of 17 is probably not something I should align myself with, and or I'm just not going to do anything proficient. So that's why I opted to go to other country, and Finland was basically the perfect choice.
So how would you say is mentality in Finland when it comes to like ecological awareness different from the one in Russia?
It differs a lot. Once again, it's night and day, basically because they've been paying a lot of attention to many different factors in society. Because Finland, although it's kind of a police state, if I'm being honest, way more of a police state than Russia, actually, it does have some fruitful outcomes in there because they implement actually pretty good social programs and social initiatives. For example, environmental issues and the ways that you as a person can contribute to solving those issues is actually taught pretty heavily in schools. So children already know what they can do and how they should behave themselves to help the environment. And it has been like that for multiple decades. And it's actually really effective because for the first generation of Finns that have been taught so extensively on the environment, they knew some things and they started implementing those things in their everyday life. But when they became adults, their children, not only have they been learning in schools, but they have also been learning from their parents, from their example. And as we all know, children they learn from their parents because they are like their prime examples in life. They basically, they are sponges at certain ages. So it actually has a lot of fruitful, how do I say, it's been really fruitful for them, I'd say.
So what I want to ask you is, how do you think Russia could take maybe some ideas or some experience from Finland and implement it? What initiative of Finland would you consider be, well, readily implemented in Russia?
I would say that being more precise and centralized in terms of legislation is definitely a way to go, but I should cut myself here because I actually, and it's totally my perception of this problem, and do not take it as gospel because in this world I am but a measly tech and I do not know half of the things I should know about this. But once again, I think that actually we need to decentralize somewhat in terms of our implementation and enforcement of environmental legislation, because when we try to centralize, it actually becomes vague. That's one of the problems, at least. When we try to centralize it and implement all the factors of all the different corners of Russia, it becomes so compounded, it becomes so heavy and so just terrible and clunky.
So would you say from that perspective that without changing the political system in Russia, no real change can come to ecology control?
Not exactly. I wouldn't say that the whole system needs to be changed. I would say that the system in terms of environmental legislation should be at least adjusted, because there are some actually pretty good bases. I need to give credit where it's due, because there are some actually pretty good decisions that I can see can actually be implemented really well within the legislation. But it's just, once again, it's so heavy, and it's has to be coordinated by so many factors, because, for example, the climate in, for example, Black Sea is really different from St. Petersburg or from Yakutia or from Vladivostok. And there are so many other factors that needs to be taken into accordance to implement the legislation properly. That's why it becomes so vague, because it needs to account for so many different things. But once again, even when it's decentralized, it still needs to be clear cut. It still needs to be black and white, because that's basically how it is in Finland. They are very precise with their terminology, with the way things are implemented, with the way they try to convey certain terms. Like, everything is written beforehand. Like, for example, when they sell you some medicine, the price of disposal of pharmaceutical waste is already counted in there. So you already know that you are kind of paying for the same thing, for example, with cars, the same thing, and you need to account for that as a producer. As a company, you also need to account for such things. You need to pay for disposing your wastes if they are not treated properly. And you actually need to pay quite a lot in taxes. So you're incentivized to treat them properly. And it's actually really well defined what kinds of waste you should treat in this way or another, which waste you can actually treat so that it, for example, can produce electricity, which waste you can basically give it a second life and basically redesign it, repurpose it. It's actually very clear, I would say. And it's not the way in Russia. It's really different. Everything is so vague. Sometimes I actually want to quit my job, because I do not understand what I need to do as an engineer. I need clear-cut answers, but they're not there. And no one can actually give me a certain answer that will correlate with other experts. And sometimes it just blows my mind wide open.
Well, we are all working on changing that, and hopefully everything is not as drastic as you describe it to be. Thank you very much for being with us today. Unfortunately, we need to cut a little bit shorter since we started a little bit late and we still have other speakers coming up. So thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. And well, thank you for what you do and for openly speaking about the situation in Russia. It's very valuable, and thank you for that.
Thank you for inviting me. I do hope things will change. And if you are watching it, no matter where, from Russia or from Germany, you can make a change. I do believe it. So go ahead, do what you can, contribute to your society. And I hope everything will become better, both in Russia and Germany.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.
You too.